Lesson 94, Using the Dative Case. Lisa, this is our third lesson in which we've talked about indirect objects. In Lesson 92, we talked about indirect objects in English. And then in Lesson 93, we talked about the dative case. We talked about the different forms of the definite article and ein words. And here in this lesson, we're talking about how to actually use these German articles in an actual sentence. And so we have a sample sentence here about giving a book to a man. And so we've studied two different ways to word the sentence in English, two different ways to indicate the indirect object. With one way, we use the preposition to, and we say to the man. And the other way involves word order. We park the indirect object before the direct object. So that's like, I am giving the man the book. So we have two different ways to arrange the wording in the sentence. But the way that it's going to happen in German is more like the second sentence. Is that correct, Lisa?
That is correct. So you would want to put the indirect object in the dative case right before the direct object in the accusative case.
So a word-for-word translation of how it will be in German is more like the sentence that says, I am giving the man the book. That's the basic sentence structure of how it's going to be in German. And I got an interesting email the other day, Lisa, from a reader who was reading my beginning Latin book. And he said that in his English grammar book that his family uses for homeschooling, they said that if you say to the man, like in our first example sentence here, I am giving the book to the man, that is not an indirect object. Like in the first sentence, I am giving the book to the man. According to him, his English grammar book says that if you say to the man, that's really a prepositional phrase, technically not an indirect object. According to him, the second sentence is the one that contains a true indirect object. I am giving the man the book. So in that particular sentence, the man is a true indirect object, whereas in the first one, to the man is not really an indirect object. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with that. So usually whenever you have a preposition in front of a noun and its article, in grammar terms, this would be considered a prepositional object.
The book he was referring to that I wrote is my beginning Latin book. And so in Latin, we always translate the dative case. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Latin is similar to German because it also has a dative case and an accusative case and a genitive case. And we always translate the dative case in Latin with to or for. We say it's to someone or for someone. And so that meaning is just embedded in the dative case. So when I say it in English, that to the man is an indirect object, the way I'm looking at it is as a translation of Latin. So there's a little bit of ambiguity here in the sense that we translate foreign languages that way, but strictly speaking in English, you could say that that's not really an indirect object. Anyway, that's just more of an interesting side note. It doesn't really affect the German that we're trying to learn here in this lesson.
I like how you say that that idea of to or for is embedded in the dative case, because the dative case so often gives you a recipient, somebody you're giving something to, you're giving help, you're giving a gift, you're giving something you bought for them, whatever it is. They're receiving something. So I think this is a nice way to put it.
And that's exactly how I think of it. Years ago, I asked my Latin professor, I said, what is the best way to describe the dative case in Latin? He said the dative case is the party in the sentence that is receiving or benefiting. And so in Latin and in German as well, you can show who is receiving or benefiting without the use of a preposition. But in English, here's where I disagree a little bit with the idea that I am giving the book to the man is not a real indirect object, because it is a legitimate way in English to show who is receiving or benefiting. And the idea of to the man, if you put that in the dative case, then in Latin or in German, that idea is expressed in those languages without the help of a preposition. So technically, the preposition is not there in Latin or German, but the idea of it is. And to fully unpack that in English, we need to use a preposition and say to the man or for the man. So I see their point that they're saying that technically it's a prepositional phrase, but the point I'm making is that it's embedded in what the foreign language is communicating by the dative case. And so it's a legitimate way to express that foreign language idea in English. So I'm looking at this through the perspective of foreign languages and how we translate them. And I think the English grammar folks are looking at this through the perspective of just how we render things only in English. So I think we have two different perspectives or viewpoints on this. So before we move on, Lisa, let's remind our listeners here, for the indirect object, they have to use the dative case definite article, and they have to put it before the direct object. So the word order in this German sentence is not flexible for what they know right now. Would you agree with that?
For this sentence, yes.
So for a masculine noun like Mann, they need to use Dame, right? The dative singular masculine definite article. And again, as we say here, we don't need a preposition in German to express this. The idea of to or for is embedded within the actual dative case itself. Just by using that case, it expresses the idea of to or for without a preposition. That's a very important point I want to make clear to our listeners. Am I leaving anything out, Lisa?
No, I was just thinking, for them, it's easier to stick to this word order. But because we have those different endings, theoretically, you can switch it around. Or you can say, dem Mann gebe ich das Buch. Or you can say, das Buch gebe ich dem Mann. Because it's still very clear, because of the articles, which one is the indirect object.
But you still have to have the verb in second position, right?
Exactly. That's always very important, to keep the verb in the second position in a statement.
So, Lisa, for right now, as far as word order goes, they need to stick to this particular word order. As they get more advanced, they might have ways to switch around where the indirect object goes.
Exactly.
But for right now, they need to kind of stick with this simple structure.
I would advise to do so, yes. Makes it a little easier for the beginning, and then later on, when you know the language well, you can play around with it more.